My name's Jacques van Rijn, and I'm a program manager in the graphics team. Today, I'm excited to share an exciting update to DirectX. It's an update that's going to accelerate graphics innovation, vastly improve the developer experience for bleeding-edge game devs, and ultimately help gamers get the most out of their new hardware. Let's dive right in. I want to start this presentation by quickly talking about how feature updates for DirectX 12 works today. Since the start of Windows 10, we've relied on the Windows 10 OS to get the latest DirectX 12 features onto Microsoft's huge install base. Put another way, every update to DirectX makes its way to the next OS we ship out to Microsoft's 1 billion plus Windows 10 devices, as you can see in this graph here. Here we see how we ship variable rate shading in Windows 10 version 1903, or the May 2019 update. And then we ship the full DirectX 12 Ultimate feature set in Windows 10 version 2004, or the May 2020 update. With the OS as our next ship vehicle, the next chance we'd have to get support for a new feature like Shader Model 6.6 out is with the next major update of Windows. Doing this means we have a guarantee. It's a guarantee that the new features we implement gradually make their way to reach a massive audience of Windows 10 users. It's something that means that eventually gamers and developers all get access to the groundbreaking technology that we've been using to push graphics innovation for generations of hardware and consoles. It's a model that works, and we're proud of all the work that developers have done using this guarantee to build games that run on this huge install base. But top of the list of feedback we've heard from our developer partners is that they're excited about our features, so much so that they wish there was a way to get our features sooner and up and running on a massive install base, not just the latest Windows 10 OS. Well, we're excited to announce that we're giving developers just that with the DirectX 12 Agility SDK. With the Agility SDK, all DirectX 12 features, new and old, run on a massive install base. Every OS since version 1909 or the November 2019 update has support for all the features we're lighting up with the Agility SDK. The Agility SDK is also a way for developers to build games that use our newest features when they're ready, even before those features have begun rolling out with the next OS. Best of all, games that use the Agility SDK will run on a wide range of gamer machines today without ever asking gamers to wait or to upgrade to the latest version of Windows. Today, this means that the latest from DirectX, including DirectX 12 Ultimate and Shader Model 6.6, will run on every Windows 10 OS version 1909 and more recent. Now, we have exciting details to share from the studios we partnered with, but first, let's talk about what the Agility SDK means for you, whether you're a developer or a gamer. Our game developer partners have told us they needed our latest innovation, including DirectX 12 Ultimate on older OS versions, not just the more recent versions of Windows 10. We did just that. The Agility SDK lets developers bring our latest features to a large install base on day one. We brought OS support all the way back to the November 2019 update to ensure that developers can be confident that their games using the Agility SDK will light up features for a huge audience of Windows 10 users. We also built the Agility SDK model from the ground up to be easy to integrate into existing game engines. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to go over just how straightforward this is. With the Agility SDK model, the DirectX team has a way to get fixes and tweaks out way faster than ever before. When we fix something, we'll simply issue a new SDK with the fix, instead of asking devs to use workarounds while they're waiting for a fix to make its way to the OS through Windows updates or through the next major version of Windows. The same goes for tweaks and adjustments to our features. Now it's easier than ever to get our latest changes into the hands of developers. For bleeding edge features, developers no longer have to grab the newest Windows Insider program build, and instead just grab the newest Agility SDK. Finally, the choice to use the Agility SDK is purely optional. Devs who don't need or who don't want the latest hardware features can carry on like normal. We are still going to keep on adding and shipping the latest updates to DirectX 12 to the latest Windows 10 OS. Now, Each Agility SDK contains all the parts you need to get started with developing and shipping games with the latest DirectX 12 functionality. Check out our landing page to get started developing right after this talk. Go to aka.ms/DirectX12Agility. Here you'll find links to our first SDK, our announcement blog, and a link to our Getting Started guide. Our first Agility SDK contains support for the full DirectX 12 Ultimate feature set. And like I mentioned earlier, every OS with the November 2019 update can run Agility SDKs. This means that the full DirectX 12 Ultimate feature set can now run on an even larger install base than ever before. That's right, these features that used to be limited to devices with the May 2020 update and more recent can now run on more gamer machines today. Our first Agility SDK also has something that's so new that support for it hasn't even made its way into the OS. I'm talking about support for Shader Model 6.6, which Greg Roth is going to cover in his talk. Whether you're interested in expanding the reach of your existing DirectX 12 Ultimate capable game, or you want to catch a glimpse of a brand new update to DirectX, the Agility SDK is for you. Now, we know we have gamers in the audience too. What does all of this mean for the rest of us? Well, put simply, what's good for developers is what's good for gamers. We're talking more games with bleeding-edge features. The Agility SDK removes a barrier for developers who want to use our latest features, but who also want to wait to make sure that their gamers can actually access these new features. These developers will often wait until an OS with our latest features reaches a large enough audience of gamers, which can take some time. With the Agility SDK, there's no longer such a waiting period. Put another way, your new hardware's capabilities become real faster. When you buy brand new hardware, you can feel good about upcoming games making the most of the cutting-edge features on your new device. I'd like to chat about the work we've been doing with our partners in the games industry leading up to today's announcement. We've been working with Epic Games and other studios on the Agility SDK, and we've been incorporating their feedback to make sure that our first Agility SDK is ready for you to bring to your game today. This is just a sample of the feedback we've gotten so far, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A at the end of this presentation, so check out our announcement blog to see what our partners have to say about the Agility SDK. A bit later in this presentation, I'm going to show you how you can get started as well, and how to give us the same kind of feedback that has shaped this project from the start. Before I dive into how to use the Agility SDK, I want to talk about how the Agility SDK model works from an OS perspective. The DirectX 12 runtime, D312.dll, lives in System 32. The simplest explanation is that games that use DirectX 12 use the functions in this DLL. Now, we had a constraint when we designed the Agility SDK model. With any change we wanted to make to the OS, we needed to make sure that games that use D312.dll carry on working as normal, while still giving developers who want newer functionality the option to do just that. So we took this DLL and we split it into two. Now D312.dll is just a thin loader that most of the time will just load in D312core.dll, which now contains the bulk of what used to be the old DirectX 12 runtime. Here's a little diagram of how this works most of the time. This is the default behavior for games that don't adopt the Agility SDK, or most games. Nothing strange here. It's almost as if the change I just mentioned earlier never happened. And this is by design, because we needed to make sure that the default experience for gamers and developers remains the same as before our change. Now, I said this is how it works most of the time, because our loader can now also load a new D312 core, one that a developer using the Agility SDK will include with their game to light up the latest D312 functionality. In this case, if I'm a developer who's built a game with the Agility SDK, I'll include a copy of the D312 core that was in the Agility SDK that I used. I'm going to talk about this a bit more later in this presentation. When a newer D312core.dll gets included with a game install, meaning one that's newer than what's in the OS, our loader will load this newer D312 core. And that's pretty much all there is to it from an OS perspective. I'm about to get into how to get started, but before I do, one key point. Some of you might be wondering, wait a second, if I'm a dev who's built a game using the Agility SDK today, what happens when the next OS ships? Well, we in graphics are going to keep on shipping updates to DirectX, which means that newer OSs will have newer D312 cores. When an OS has a more recent D312 core than what a game shipped with, the OS version of D312 core gets loaded instead. This way, we can make sure that the latest, highest quality, and most validated DirectX 12 functionality eventually gets used by all games. It also means that game developers don't have to worry about getting their game using the latest version of DirectX, or about a game's version of D312 core falling out of support. This will happen automatically once later versions of DirectX 12 roll out with later versions of the OS. Before I get into how to get your game to work with the Agility SDK, here's what you need to do to set up your dev machine. We're going to go over this list one by one. Like with many DirectX features, you want to make sure that you have the right OS, drivers, and software before you get started. Double-checking you're on the right OS is simple. Just go into About in the Settings menu to check your OS version. As long as you have 1909 or above, you're good. One thing to note here is that the OS change that I just talked about has been made to 1909 and more recent via a Windows update, which has had a fair bit of time to roll out onto these OSs. The number that appended to your OS build number, the revision number, gets incremented with each update or KB patch that your OS gets. As long as the revision number is equal to or greater than 1350 for version 1909, like you can see above, or equal to or greater than 789 for versions 2004 and 20H2, your OS has received this patch with support for the Agility SDK. No worries if you didn't catch this info the first time. You can find this information and more on aka.ms/DirectX12Agility. Next up, we recommend that you use Visual Studio 2019. The free community version works if you don't already have the professional or enterprise editions. You then also need drivers with support for the Agility SDK. The Windows 10 SDK comes with a copy of the DirectX shader compiler, but if you're using shader model 6.6, you'll also want to go to aka.ms/HOSL to get the latest shader compiler. Finally, we also recommend that you go and grab Pix, which today has native Agility SDK support. Go to aka.ms/Pix on Windows. We'll have all of these links and more on our Getting Started guide. Go to aka.ms/DirectX12Agility. Okay, so your machine is set up. You're on the right OS version. You've got Visual Studio, drivers, the shader compiler you want to use, and Pix. What's next? It's really straightforward to grab and install the Agility SDK of your choice. And I've got a little demo that shows how to do this inside of Visual Studio 2019. In your Solution Explorer, right-click on your project and go to Manage NuGet Packages. Here I'm using a local folder as the package source, but you can also grab our Agility SDKs online from NuGet.org. I'm also using a preview SDK in this demo. Anyway, select the Agility SDK of your choice and hit install. There's some small changes you need to make that I'll explain in a bit, but once you've made them, you're ready to build. This sample is one of our mesh shader samples on the DirectX Graphics Samples GitHub repo. It showcases mesh shader-based culling, which is also the technique that 3D Mark uses in their mesh shader feature test to get huge performance wins over the traditional geometry pipeline. Here we see this culling in action, showing how individual meshlets within this meshletized dragon get culled in the amplification shader stage before they get fed to the rest of the pipeline. This kind of culling is not possible with the traditional geometry pipeline, and done well in Engine has big perf implications. Okay, so even though this sample is pretty cool and also looks pretty nifty, we did talk about mesh shader-based culling at last year's DirectX Dev Day. This sample and our other mesh shader samples, courtesy of Matt Hurleman, have also been up for some time. So why did I pick this sample in particular to show you? Well, those in the audience that have been following our work closely will know that mesh shaders is one of the more recent features in the DirectX 12 Ultimate feature set. In fact,
They're so new that they only ship with the May 2020 update. Before today, if you wanted to run this sample, you'd also need to be on this pretty new OS. But check this out. This machine that I'm running this sample on is running on Windows version 1909, or the November 2019 update, which is an earlier OS. That's right. What I'm showing you right now is how the Agility SDK lets you light up newer DirectX 12 features than what shipped in box with the OS. This used to be impossible before the Agility SDK.
Wow, great demo, Jacques. Before we talk about the code change you want to make, let's quickly talk about the contents of each Agility SDK. Each SDK contains the D312 core that a developer will include app local with their app, as well as the components needed for devs to build against the included D312 core. These are the API headers for the runtime, the debug layer, and D3 config. Earlier, I talked about requesting a newer D312 core than what's in the OS, i.e. the D312 cores that we're shipping in each SDK. So games set the needed parameters by exporting constant data via well-known symbols, which is what our loader needs to make its decision about whether to load an app's local copy of D312 core or to load the D312 core inside of System32. If you're a developer using the Agility SDK, you might export these constants via a module definition or a .def file. If you've done that, you'll also want to declare D312 SDK version and D312 SDK path in code, like how this developer is doing it right here. Now, I'm about to go over some notes about these two, but before I do, I'd like to note that if you don't want to use a modular definition file, you can also use the declspec keyword. We'll call out both methods in our Getting Started guide. For our first Agility SDK, D312 SDK version will be equal to 4. Today, this number exceeds any of the D312 SDK versions of any of the inbox System32 D312 core.dlls in the wild. Until the next OS ships with a more recent D312 core.dll that has a higher SDK version, our loader will always load the D312 core that we shipped in our first Agility SDK. As mentioned earlier, developers must include the D312 core.dll they built their app with. D312 SDK path is the path to the D312 core.dll they used, relative to their application exe. Here the developers shipped it in a folder called D312, which is right next to the exe. You can see it in this little file structure right here. So, we just covered what you need to do to build and ship a game using our new SDKs. I wanted to add one last bit here. After adding support for the Agility SDK to your engine, we recommend that you still query check feature support. This function, like all of D312, still runs as expected even when you use our new Agility SDKs. It's still good practice to query check feature support to double check that the features you're trying to light up are available on the machine you're trying to run your game on. You will only get a successful H result if everything, software, drivers, and hardware are in place. Again, this is no different from how check feature support worked before. If you were in the habit of using it, please carry on. At the bottom, we see a developer checking if feature level 12.2 is supported. With the new Agility SDK you can download today, this H result will be SOK on any machine with the 1909 OS or higher with supported hardware or drivers. That's right, but let's make this bit even more obvious. Here we see again that developers can now access feature level 12.2, which includes the full DirectX 12 Ultimate feature set and then some on a much larger install base than ever before. To wrap this all up, major developers have already gotten started with using the Agility SDK, and we're opening up the floodgates to all developers today. You can do the same. All this information and more is readily available. All you have to do is go to aka.ms/DirectX12Agility. If you're a developer who wants to get started, we also have an announcement blog post, a Getting Started guide, and a brand new landing page where the latest Agility SDKs will live. If you're stuck at all, please check out our DirectX Discord server. It's for developers of all skill levels. This Discord server is a great place to give us feedback. And please keep on doing so. It's literally because of developer feedback that we've done all the engineering work at Microsoft and with our IHV partners to make the Agility SDK happen in the first place. And with that, All that's left to say is happy coding. Before I hand this off to Q&A, I'd like to give a huge shout out to Randy Tidd, Seb Merry, Kev G, Sean Hargraves, and James Bartlett for all their dedicated work and guidance that made today's announcement possible. Thank you.